The sun was still hiding behind the desert mountains when 480 U.S. Marines moved out. Their boots crunched the dry sand as they entered enemy land. They were part of a special mission, one that top leaders called clean and quick. Everyone believed it would take only 4 hours, in and out. No problems, it was supposed to be simple. But war never listens to plans. From a higher ridge far behind them, Sergeant Elena Ramirez adjusted her sniper scope. She was the overwatch, the eye in the sky. She was not to move, not to speak, and not to shoot, unless ordered. Her job was to watch and report. She had done it many times. But something about today felt wrong. Very wrong. Elena wasn't like other soldiers. She had grown up in a rough neighborhood at 12. She could take apart a rifle blindfolded at 18. She joined the Marines and broke every sniper record in boot camp. But even with all her skills, she never became proud. She knew pride could get people killed. Next to her was Private Jack Collin, her young spotter. He was fresh out of training and full of questions. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you ever seen something go this smooth?" Elena looked through her scope, scanning every inch of the valley below. "No," she replied softly. "And that's what scares me, down in the valley." The 480 Marines moved like shadows. No gunfire, no noise, no trouble, too perfect. They crossed bridges, past old buildings, and entered a narrow pass, still no contact. "Maybe the intel was wrong," Jack whispered. Elena didn't answer. Her gut told her something was coming. Suddenly a flash, a sound like the sky tearing open. The ground shook and black smoke filled the air. An explosion had gone off right in the center of the Marine column. Then another and another. "Ambush," shouted a voice over the radio. But then, static. The main communication channel went dead. Panic spread like fire. Marines were running, dragging wounded brothers behind them. Screams and gunfire echoed in the air. Elena's hands tightened around her rifle. Her scope now showed chaos and bodies on the ground. Enemy shadows on rooftops. She reached for her radio. "Command, this is Overwatch 1. The unit is under heavy attack. I need orders." Nothing. Only silence. Jack looked at her, sweating, scared. "Ma'am, what do we do?" She didn't answer. Not yet. Protocol said wait. Don't shoot unless told. But the Marines were being cut down like wheat. Elena bit her lip hard, her heart pounding in her ears. She looked through the scope again. Enemy fighters moved fast, aiming rocket launchers at the trapped Marines. One Marine captain tried to rally his men but was shot in the leg. Still no response from command. Still no order to engage, Elena whispered to herself. "If I fire without permission, I could be court-martialed." She turned to Jack. "They'll strip my badge, maybe jail me." Jack didn't blink. "But if you don't fire, they all die." Elena stared at the scope, her finger resting near the trigger. The clock was ticking, lives were vanishing. This mission was never supposed to fail. It was planned by generals, approved by intelligence experts. It had satellite maps, drone support, backup teams, everything. But now 480 lives were hanging by a thread. And only one person had a clear shot. A woman behind a sniper scope on a quiet ridge. Elena had a choice. Follow orders, or follow her heart, save her career, or save her brothers in arms. She exhaled slowly, adjusting her aim. "Jack," she whispered, "mark targets." He blinked, surprised, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." And at that moment, history began to change. Smoke crawled across the valley like a living shadow. The first explosion had taken out a troop truck. Then came the sound no soldier wants to hear, and the second blast. Closer. Louder. Screams followed, then gunfire from the hills above. The narrow valley had turned into a trap. The 480 Marines were now scattered. Some dove behind broken walls, others crawled under damaged vehicles. The air was thick with dust and panic. The enemy had planned this ambush carefully. They waited until the entire unit was inside the pass, then sealed the exit with fire and shrapnel. From the ridge, Sergeant Elena Ramirez watched the nightmare unfold through her sniper scope. Enemy fighters in desert robes moved like ghosts between the ruins. They had the high ground and surprise on their side. Each second was another life lost. Elena's breathing slowed, but her heart didn't in training. They taught her to keep emotions locked away, but now, watching her fellow Marines fall one by one, something inside her cracked. This wasn't war anymore. This was slaughter beside her. Private Jack Collin tried to fix their broken radio. He shook it, hit it, begged it, but all they heard was static and a voice that kept cutting off mid-sentence. "Command, come in. We're under heavy fire, nothing down below." Corporal Dane was dragging two wounded men into cover behind an overturned truck. His arm was bleeding, but he didn't care. "Where's our air support?" Someone yelled. No one answered. They were all thinking the same thing. They'd been left behind. Elena saw an enemy soldier lift a rocket launcher onto his shoulder. The target was clear. A group of Marines huddled near a fuel container, one shot, and it would all go up. She didn't wait. Her trigger finger squeezed. The enemy dropped, the rocket launcher fell harmlessly. Jack looked at her in shock. "That wasn't an order," he whispered. Elena didn't blink. "That was survival," she replied. Another enemy popped up behind a crumbling wall. Elena adjusted her aim and fired again. Clean shot the Marines below began to notice. They looked up, confused. Sniper support wasn't supposed to be active. But someone was watching and someone was protecting them. "Keep calling out targets," Elena told Jack. He wiped the sweat from his brow and scanned the valley with his binoculars. "Rooftop 2 o'clock. Moving fast." She fired again. Missed. Second shot. Hit. The dust in the valley made it hard to see. Gunfire bounced off stone and metal. The smell of burned oil and blood filled the air. Still no word from command, still no backup. But the enemy now had a problem. They were being hunted from above. Jack crawled to a better spot and pulled out his field map. "We need to warn the next team," he said. "They're supposed to come through the east road in 10 minutes, Elena thought fast. "If they enter this valley, they'll be hit just like the first group." She made a decision. "Mark the east road and fire a warning shot near them when they get close. Scare them off." "Isn't that dangerous?" Jack asked. "Not as dangerous as walking into this," she replied. On the ground, things were falling apart. Corporal Dane ran out of ammo. Private Lewis was hit in the leg, couldn't move. Two Marines used a car door as a shield and tried to pull him to safety. Still no air support, still no word. Elena fired again and again, picking off the most dangerous threats. "But there were too many," Jack shouted. "Two more on the left ridge." She turned her scope, too late. A grenade launched from above landed near a group of Marines. Boom, the dust covered everything. Bodies, guns, broken helmets, time slowed. Elena blinked, unable to see through her scope. Then a hand on her shoulder. "Jack." "They're falling back," he said. "The enemy is retreating to the West Hills. Why?" Then she realized. The sniper fire made them think reinforcements had arrived. They didn't want to risk being surrounded. It wasn't backup, it wasn't drones. It was just one woman, but it was enough still. Many Marines were wounded and dozens were dead. But many more had survived. Because Elena chose to break protocol. She didn't have orders, she had instinct. And that instinct saved lives as she lowered her rifle. She whispered to herself, "This isn't over." The valley was silent for only a moment. A thick golden haze hung in the air, mixing with the smell of gunpowder and death. Bodies lay still between burnt vehicles. The dust covered everything like a cruel blanket. But beneath that silence, and danger was still breathing, Sergeant Elena Ramirez stayed low behind a rock on the ridge. Her rifle rested steady, her eye pressed against the scope. Every muscle in her body was tight. She had just broken a direct order and saved dozens of lives, but she knew it wasn't over. The enemy never disappeared so easily. Beside her, Private Jack Collin reloaded a magazine with shaking hands. He was young, maybe too young for a battlefield like this. "Ma'am," he whispered, "I think they're regrouping." Elena adjusted her scope. Scanning the far side of the valley, he was right. Through the dust, shapes began to move again, dozens of them, maybe more. They weren't retreating. They were preparing for a second strike. Her scope followed their movements like a hawk. She saw them laying fresh explosives, repositioning snipers. They were setting up kill zones, invisible areas of death. "Anyone who entered would never leave alive, Jack," she said softly. "Mark the buildings near Grid 7. He circled them on his map. Those buildings looked abandoned, but Elena knew better. She saw a flash inside, a mirror signal that meant sniper positions. 3 shooters, she whispered. 1 east, 2 west. Jack's throat went dry. "That's a triangle formation," he said. Elena nodded. "They're trapping anyone who moves down below." Corporal Dane and a small group of Marines were trying to regroup the survivors. Their medic, Lieutenant Harris, was kneeling beside a soldier with a chest wound. Blood soaked the sand. Dane's radio crackled. Weak. Half-dead signal. Overwatch. "You still there?" Elena heard it faintly. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm here." "Can you cover us?" Dane asked, voice trembling. Elena looked through the scope again. She saw an enemy aiming right at Dane. Without a word, she fired. The bullet went straight through the target's scope. "Clean shot already did," she said into the radio. Jack looked at her with wide eyes. That was a 2-mile shot. Elena didn't smile. "Keep counting," she replied quietly. She could feel the heat burning her neck. Hours under the sun, barely blinking, barely breathing. But her mind was sharp. Every shadow meant danger. Every movement meant death. This was her world, the kill zone, and right now, 480 lives depended on her eyes. Jack suddenly froze. "Ma'am, left ridge, movement." Elena turned her scope. A small convoy of enemy trucks was moving toward the valley. "They're bringing reinforcements," she whispered. She counted 6 trucks, maybe 50 more fighters. If they reached the valley, everything would end. Elena took out her radio again. "This is Overwatch 1, enemy convoy inbound. 6 trucks, west approach, request immediate airstrike. Static." She tried again, louder, nothing. The radio was dead. Jack slammed his hand against the dirt. "They don't even know we're here." Elena closed her eyes for a second, then she made a choice. "Then we'll make them know." She aimed at the first truck's fuel tank, held her breath, and fired. The bullet hit. A heartbeat later. Boom! The first truck exploded into flames. The others stopped, confused. She fired again. Second truck had gone. Now the entire convoy was panicking. They thought they'd walked into a minefield. They began turning back, retreating from their own ambush. Jack couldn't believe what he was seeing. "You just stopped 50 men with 2 bullets, Elena reloaded. "No," she said. "I just bought us time. Down below." The surviving Marines began to move again. They carried the wounded, formed a perimeter, and waited for orders that would never come. But they had something better. A guardian they couldn't see. Each time an enemy tried to move close, he dropped. Each time a sniper took aim, his scope went dark. No one knew who was protecting them. Only that someone up there refused to let them die. Hours passed, the sun began to fall. The valley turned gold, then red, then dark. Elena hadn't eaten, hadn't spoken. Her eyes were raw. Her lips cracked, but she didn't stop watching. Because she knew the kill zone wasn't cleared yet. Jack finally whispered, "Ma'am, when do we rest?" Elena lowered her rifle and looked at the dying light. "When they do," she said, pointing at the Marines below. Then she raised her scope again, and the last light of the sun glimmered across her lens like a silent promise. She wouldn't stop, not until the valley was quiet, not until every Marine under her watch was safe. The wind was dry and sharp as it swept across the ridge. It carried the scent of burned fuel, blood, and broken silence. Sergeant Elena Ramirez lay flat against the rock, her body aching, but her eye never left the scope. Down in the valley, the wounded Marines were running out of time. She had already fired warning shots, taken out key threats, and delayed an enemy convoy, but that wasn't enough anymore. Now the insurgents were moving again, smarter, faster, more deadly. They knew there was a sniper, and they were starting to hunt her. Her spotter, Private Jack Collin, watched nervously as the enemy spread out like dark ink across the valley. "They're closing in," he whispered. Elena didn't reply. She was focused on one figure near a broken building. He was dragging something, a heavy weapon, too large for just one man, a rocket launcher, and he was setting it up in the perfect position to wipe out the cluster of Marines hiding behind a wrecked vehicle. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger. One shot would stop it all, but she paused. Protocol had rules. Snipers couldn't fire without clearance, not unless directly ordered. If she shot now, it would be the first unauthorized kill. And that meant punishment, court-martial, possibly prison. She had already gone too far, but this was different. This was the moment, one pull, and she would either become a hero or a criminal. Jack whispered, "Ma'am, you can't wait. Do you see them? They don't even know what's coming." Elena adjusted her scope slightly, focusing on the enemy's chest. Her breath slowed, she exhaled and squeezed. The shot rang out like thunder cracking through silence. The man dropped. His weapon fell to the ground before it could launch. Down below, the Marines turned their heads, shocked by the sudden blast. Then they saw the body, and they knew they weren't alone. Someone had their back. Jack stared at her. "That was it," he said, voice shaking. "You just broke command." Elena didn't answer. She reloaded calmly. "That wasn't breaking command," she said. "That was saving lives." But the echo of that shot traveled far. The enemy fighters now moved faster. They were angry, alert. Sniper fire meant they had a weakness. They had to find it and kill it. A group of 4 insurgents climbed the west ridge. Their eyes scanned the rocks, looking for any movement. Elena saw them through her scope. One of them carried a long-range rifle, a counter-sniper. "Jack," she whispered. "Shift left, they're coming for us." He crawled to cover, his hands shaking. "If they get this close, we're done," he said. Elena smiled for the first time that day. "Then we don't let them get close." She lined up her shot and fired. First man down, the second one ducked but made the mistake of running in the open. Second shot and down. The other two dropped behind a rock, hiding, waiting. But Elena was patient. She watched the angle of their rifles, the way their shadows moved. The moment one peeked out, third shot, gone, only one left, he tried to run. She didn't miss. Jack sat back stunned. "You just took down 4 counter-snipers in less than a minute." Elena didn't look up. "Too slow," she said. Then finally she sighed, her lips cracked. Her eyes red from the scope, but inside her, something had changed. That first shot. It opened a door she could never close again. Down in the valley, the Marines began to push forward, encouraged by the sniper support they didn't expect. Corporal Dane yelled orders, moving the survivors out of the kill zone. They didn't know who was protecting them, but they trusted the invisible hand from above. Elena shifted her scope again, now focusing farther on the east hills, a dust trail, tanks. She blinked, then smiled. "Jack," she said, "air support's finally here." Jack looked through his own binoculars and let out a breath. 2 Blackhawks and a drone hovered in the distance. Too late for some, but maybe just in time for the rest. As the choppers closed in, the remaining enemy fighters began to scatter. The ambush was breaking, the valley was no longer theirs. But it wasn't the airstrike that changed everything. It wasn't the reinforcements or the commands from faraway headquarters. It was one shot from one sniper, who chose people over rules, and wrote her own orders with gunpowder and steel. Night was falling fast. The sky turned deep orange, then faded into dark blue. The valley, once alive with chaos, now stood quiet but tense. A deadly silence had settled over the land. Sergeant Elena Ramirez lay on the ridge, her fingers numb from holding her sniper rifle too long. Her shoulder ached from recoil, her lips cracked from dry air. She hadn't eaten, hadn't rested, but she stayed because they still needed her. The Marines below had started pulling back to safer ground. The wounded were being carried out one by one, but there were still many trapped in smaller pockets, still breathing, still fighting, and now with nightfall, new dangers were coming. Beside her, Private Jack Collin coughed and leaned against a rock. He held his side, blood soaked through his shirt. He'd been hit by flying debris when an enemy grenade exploded nearby. "I'm okay," he said, voice low. Elena knew he was lying, but there was no time for rest. No room for weakness through her scope. She saw figures moving near the far ridge, at least 7 of them. Enemy scouts. They moved low, silent, trained. These weren't just fighters. These were the ones who hunted snipers. "They're coming for us," Jack whispered. Elena nodded. "We knew they would," she replied. She adjusted her scope. Her bullets were low, just 9 rounds left. 9 bullets, 7 targets, 1 chance. The first scout raised a rifle. Elena fired, 1 down. Another moved behind a rock. She waited. Then he peeked, 2 down. But now they knew her exact location. Bullets began to hit the rocks around her. Sharp cracks echoed in the night. Jack dragged himself behind a larger boulder. "You should move," he called out. Elena shook her head. "If I move, they'll flank us," she fired again. Missed. Another hit that left 6 bullets, still too many enemies. One of the scouts got closer than expected. He threw something, a flashbang. The world went white for a second. Elena's ears rang, her head spun, but she forced herself to breathe. She blinked until the vision cleared, and then she fired blind. The bullet caught the attacker in the chest. She didn't have time to think. They were climbing the ridge now, fast. One came up over the side, too close. She dropped her sniper and pulled her sidearm. Pop, 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 3 shots. One hit, he fell back, but now she was exposed. She rolled behind a rock just as another bullet hit the spot where her head had been. Dust filled her nose, her heartbeat roared in her ears. Jack groaned from behind her. "Ma'am, it's just us." Elena looked at her pistol. 2 rounds left. Sniper, 2 rounds as well, 4 bullets, too many enemies. But she didn't panic, not Elena. She had trained for this, she was this. She grabbed a smoke grenade from her belt, pulled the pin, tossed it downhill. Thick white smoke poured out. Covering the slope, confusion broke out below. She switched back to the sniper rifle. Through thermal scope, she could still see heat. She fired once, hit a leg. Fired again, headshot done, that was it. Her rifle clicked, empty. She looked at Jack. He passed her his spare pistol with shaky hands. "That's all we've got," he whispered. She took it, 4 bullets loaded. Then silence again. She crawled over to Jack. Checked his wound, still bleeding, but not deadly. Not yet. She tore a piece of her sleeve and pressed it down. "You're not dying today," she said. "I won't let you." Suddenly, through the smoke, movement. A shadow stood tall, aiming straight at her. Elena didn't wait. She fired once. The shadow staggered twice. It dropped. She listened. Nothing else. Maybe the last one, maybe not. She stayed crouched, gun raised, waiting. Her hands shook now, not from fear, from exhaustion. The kind that creeps into your bones and tells you to just lie down. But she couldn't, not when Marines still needed her. Suddenly, voices on the radio. "Overwatch 1, this is Falcon Team." "We are inbound on your position," Elena almost cried. Almost. Instead, she answered, "This is Overwatch 1. Ridge is still hot, enemy scouts down requesting immediate evac for 1 wounded and 1 very tired sniper." Jack chuckled weakly. "You forgot to say legendary," she smirked. "Let them decide that later." She lowered her weapon and looked at the valley one last time. So many fallen, so many saved, and she, just one against many. But not broken, never broken. The night sky had turned dark. Not peaceful dark, but heavy, silent, and full of ghosts. The kind of darkness that wraps around your soul. The kind of night that knows what happened in the daylight. Sergeant Elena Ramirez sat behind her rifle, still staring down the valley. Her scope was empty now. Her ammo gone. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from exhaustion. She had been on that ridge for over 16 hours, firing, crawling, watching, saving, fighting a war no one else could see from command. Beside her, Private Jack Collin groaned in pain. His side was soaked in blood, but his spirit hadn't left. "You hear that?" he whispered, eyes barely open. Elena paused. Then she heard it. A deep hum in the distance, growing louder. A sound like thunder rolling through the sky. Not from nature, but from the blades of helicopters. Finally, help had arrived. 2 Black Hawk choppers came into view, low and fast. Their searchlights cut through the dark like swords of fire. One circled the valley, scanning for enemy movement. The other moved toward the extraction point where the remaining Marines waited, still holding their wounded. Still guarding their fallen. Elena exhaled. But she didn't smile, not yet. The radio on her vest crackled. "Overwatch 1. This is Falcon Team." She picked it up slowly. "This is Overwatch," she replied, her voice rough, dry like sandpaper. "Enemy scouts are down. Ridge is clear. We've got 1 wounded." There was a pause, then, "Roger that. We're coming to get you." Elena looked at Jack. "You're going home, soldier?" He gave a weak grin. "And you?" She looked back at the valley. The burning trucks, the shattered walls. "I'm not sure where home is anymore," she whispered. The chopper hovered just above their ridge. A medic was lowered by rope. His boots hit the ground hard. He rushed to Jack and checked his vitals. "He's stable," the medic called up. "But we need to move fast." Elena helped lift Jack into the harness. She watched as the chopper pulled him up into the night. Then she turned away. She didn't want him to see the tears in her eyes. Another rope dropped for her. She looked at her rifle. The one that had fired the shots no one authorized, the one that had made her a target. A protector, a traitor to some, a hero to others. She picked it up and wrapped it across her back. Then grabbed the rope and let herself be lifted from the ridge. Her body rose into the night air. Below her, the valley looked quiet, but only she knew how loud it had been. When her boots touched down inside the chopper, the crew stared at her in silence. They had heard whispers of the sniper who held the hill, but now they saw her, covered in dust. Lips cracked, blood on her hands, still calm, still standing. One soldier reached out and offered her a water bottle. She nodded, took a sip, then leaned back and closed her eyes. But sleep didn't come, not yet. Her mind was still on the faces she saw through the scope. The ones she saved, the ones she couldn't. The chopper lifted higher, down below. The valley faded into shadows. But inside Elena's heart, it would never disappear. At the base, chaos waited. Medics rushed to unload the wounded. Command officers gathered in tight groups. Questions filled the air. What happened? Why were the Marines ambushed? Who gave the order to fire? But one question burned louder than the rest. Who was the sniper who ignored the rules and saved them all? Elena stepped off the helicopter slowly, her legs barely steady. She looked around at the faces, surprised, shocked, some ashamed. A colonel approached. Stiff posture, unreadable face. "You broke every rule in the book," he said quietly. Elena stared at him. "Yes, sir." "You disobeyed command." "Yes." "Sir?" "You saved over 300 Marines." She didn't answer that. The colonel looked away, then said something that stayed with her for the rest of her life. "You may not be thanked in the way you deserve," he said, "but they will never forget that night." Helena sat alone outside the base, the stars above her cold and silent. She didn't need medals. She didn't want parades. All she wanted was peace. But she knew peace didn't come easy for soldiers like her. Not when they had seen what she saw. Not when they had become the last line between life and death. Still, she had one thing that no command could ever take. Her conscience, her decision, her shot, and in a world full of orders, that one act of defiance made all the difference. The sun had barely risen over the base, but the hall outside the command office was already filled with whispers. Rumors moved faster than orders, and today, all the whispers had one name in them, Sergeant Elena Ramirez. She sat alone in a cold chair, still in her dusty uniform, still wearing the boots from the battlefield. Her face was calm, but her hands were clasped tightly, not from fear, but from something deeper, a quiet storm that had nowhere else to go. Jack was recovering in the medical tent. He had begged to be there for her, but she told him to rest. "This part," she had said, "I have to face alone." An officer walked out of the conference room and called her name. "Sergeant Ramirez." She stood, adjusted her collar, then stepped inside. The room was silent except for the sound of boots on the floor. 3 officers sat behind a long table. A general stood by the window, arms crossed. A military lawyer sat off to the side. Flipping through pages of a thick folder, her file, Elena stood at attention. "Sergeant Ramirez reporting as ordered." The general turned slowly. He was an older man, stone-faced, the kind who had seen too much war and not enough truth. "You know why you're here," he said. Elena nodded. "Yes." "Sir, you disobeyed standing orders," another officer said, reading from the file. "You engaged the enemy without authorization. You fired multiple shots from a sniper position during a blackout protocol. And in doing so," the general interrupted, "you saved over 300 Marines." The room went quiet. Elena didn't move, didn't blink. She didn't know if they were building her up or preparing to break her down. The lawyer spoke next. "Sergeant, were you aware your actions could result in disciplinary charges?" "Yes, sir." "Then why did you do it?" Elena took a breath. She could have said a lot, but she chose just one sentence, "Because if I didn't, they'd all be dead." Silence again. A heavy silence. The kind that wraps itself around truth and forces people to decide what kind of story they want to tell. The general walked slowly toward her. "You weren't supposed to be the hero, Sergeant," he said. "I wasn't trying to be," she replied. "I was just trying not to be a witness." He stared at her for a long time, then looked at the others. "No formal charges," he said. "She broke rules." "Yes, but she saved the mission." One of the officers cleared his throat. "But sir, if we allow this—" The general cut him off. "Then maybe we rewrite the rules," he turned back to Elena. "You'll receive a temporary suspension from field duty while we file the official report." Elena nodded slowly. "And then?" He gave her a tired look. "Then we'll see what the Pentagon thinks." As she walked out of the room, soldiers passing by paused in quiet respect. No one clapped, no one saluted, but they looked at her differently now, like someone who had been where no one else dared go, and came back still standing later that night. She sat under the stars near the edge of the base, a quiet place where few ever came. She finally allowed herself to breathe. Not victory, not relief, just breath, the kind that comes when the weight is still there, but your spine stops shaking. Jack limped over with 2 coffee cups. "One for him, one for her, still no medal?" he asked with a smirk. Elena took a sip. "They don't give medals for disobedience," she said. "But maybe they should." Jack sat beside her. "You think you'll get sent home?" She shrugged. "I think I did what had to be done." "And I think," Jack said, "you made a choice that most wouldn't have the guts to even think about." They sat in silence for a while. No need for words, not after everything they'd seen, not after everything they'd survived. Elena didn't care about recognition. She didn't want to be famous. She didn't need applause, but deep down, she hoped someone in a suit far away would read that report and understand what it meant to make the right decision at the wrong time. She was ready to face whatever came next, because what mattered most wasn't how the story ended, but how many were still alive to tell it, and that was enough for her. The ceremony was scheduled for a bright afternoon. The sky was clear, the flags were raised, and the brass-polished a row of soldiers stood in dress uniforms. Stiff and silent at the center of it all was a small wooden stage, and on that stage, an empty chair. Sergeant Elena Ramirez was supposed to sit in it, but she didn't want to. She watched from behind a nearby tent, arms folded, boots still dusty, her dress uniform pressed but untouched. She had worn it only once, the day her father was buried with honors. Today it stayed folded on her bunk. Beside her stood Private Jack Collin, now walking again, still healing, still smiling. "They're calling your name," he said gently. "I didn't do it for medals," she replied. "I know," he said. "But you earned it anyway." The general took the stage. He read a long speech about bravery, about sacrifice, about a sniper who made the impossible choice and saved hundreds. People clapped, cameras flashed, but the seat stayed empty. Later, when the crowd thinned out and the chairs were taken down, a young Marine approached Elena quietly. He held something small and gold in his hand. The medal. "It's yours," he said. They wanted to mail it, but the general said that would be wrong. Elena looked at the medal, a shining piece of metal on a ribbon. It sparkled in the sunlight, it looked beautiful, and yet it felt so heavy. She took it silently, held it for a moment, then placed it gently into her pocket. "Thank you," she said, and nothing more that night. The base was quiet, no gunfire, no helicopters, no radios, just wind and distant memories. Elena walked to the memorial wall near the edge of the camp. It was where soldiers wrote the names of the fallen with chalk. Dozens of names, some she knew, some she would never forget. She stood there for a long time, then pulled out the medal and laid it gently beneath the wall, not because she didn't value it, but because it belonged to all of them, not just her. Behind her, Jack watched silently. "You sure about leaving it there?" he asked. Elena nodded. "They died because someone waited too long," she said. "I didn't wait, and I won't forget." A few weeks later, Elena's file was officially closed. No charges, no further action, but also no ceremony, no headline. Just a quiet note added to her record. Engaged enemy forces during unauthorized engagement, resulting in successful evacuation of unit. That was it. A single line that would never carry the weight of what she did. But she didn't mind. She returned home months later, not to cheering crowds or newspaper interviews, but to an empty apartment and a quiet morning. She sat by her window with a cup of coffee, her rifle stored away in a locked case, her uniform folded neatly in a box, and her medal still resting under the memorial wall. Sometimes people asked her about that day. The day 480 Marines were left for dead, the day one sniper defied orders. She'd usually just smile, say something short. "It was a long day," or "We did what we had to do." But those who were there, they knew. The survivors told the story to new recruits. They pointed to the ridge whenever they returned to that valley and said, "Someone was up there and she didn't let us die." Years later, a book would mention her name in one small chapter, a line that read, "Some heroes wear medals, others wear silence, and in a dusty military base far away, under a wall of names, a medal still sits quietly, untouched, not forgotten, just resting, like the woman who earned it, a sniper, a soldier, a protector, and the kind of legend who never asked to be one."